Frank Sinatra, a man with an avalanches and cake song named after him, is an interesting one. Sure, he is quite famous, but I imagine, like myself, many of you out there at the time of this battle's release only vaguely knew of him. And even now, maybe you only know him as the guy from A Christmas Song or Two, or maybe New York, New York, or one of his other big hits that show up in movies sometimes. Which is really a shame. A few years after this battle first aired, I really started diving into his work and gaining an appreciation for the big band era of music in general, and all I can say is that Sinatra simply has the voice and a ton of great songs. Likewise, he was a pretty interesting man who led a pretty interesting life with a lot of things you could reference in a rap battle setting. As for his inclusion here, though it was definitely a little more out of step with pop culture at the time than most other choices up to this point, I feel I've already painted a picture of why Sinatra is a pretty good choice for epic rap battles of history as a whole. And really, he's pretty in line with what we've seen so far in season 2. We've already had the musical legends in Elvis and Michael Jackson, and we've already had an older celebrity more famous in 2012 for their icon status rather than their work in Marilyn Monroe. Frank Sinatra is kinda just both these concepts rolled into one figure, to the point I'd argue this feels maybe too soon and maybe like a retread. Portraying Sinatra, it's our boy Epic Lloyd, and he looks decently convincing at a glance. Kind of, not really, I guess at least the costume is fine. As with Elvis and MJ, Sinatra also performed through multiple eras, with his most famous being his Vegas days, where he would perform with a cigarette in one hand and scotch in the other, which Lloyd here is emulating. One thing that bothers me though is the eyes. Lloyd's eyes here look maybe bluish to greenish, although the internet tells me that they're hazel, so I don't know what's going on there, but in any case, the lighting or the color grading on this battle is pretty terrible for showcasing the face of a celebrity, literally nicknamed Old Blue Eyes, because of his specifically strikingly bright blue irises. From a production standpoint, even if you didn't have an actor with bright blue eyes lined up for the role, I would have at least gotten Lloyd some blue stage contacts and really spotlighted what is a defining trait of this character. It never ceases to blow my mind how Nice Peter can mold into the figures he's portraying. He's a dead ringer for iconic Queen singer Freddie Mercury, specifically from the early 80s mustache era. And Mercury was in 2012 and still very much is more dominant in pop culture than Sinatra, especially among the target demographic of these videos. And at the time, I didn't necessarily know a ton about Queen, but my parents would play their greatest hits album on road trips, you know, the one that literally everybody owned, and I for sure loved it. Under Pressure was also on the David Bowie greatest hits album we owned, and it was my favorite song when I was like 10. So while I'm totally neutral now, Kid Me certainly had a favorite in this battle, maybe more so than with any up until this point. And something in my gut tells me that wasn't a unique experience for viewers. And maybe also not for the production crew, since at a glance you can tell whose costume had more effort put into it. We'll dig into the potential favoritism a bit more as we go, but first, my song. And as always, thank you to Poner, Timey, and Laser Panda for supporting the show. Poner wanted to note that what keeps this battle from feeling like a really good one, despite some good disses and lines, is that it essentially boils down to a Freddie Mercury circle jerk, because Nice Peter loves Freddie so much that they basically desecrated Frank Sinatra's portrayal in the process. And oh yeah, Poner, I agree on that one. We'll get to it. Also, Poner has a theory that the reason Frank Sinatra is in a tux is that they already had a couple suit and tie guests and wanted to mix it up a bit, which I think is probably a reasonable theory. And Timey wanted to ask how I felt about Queen somehow getting better representation through the Muppets than what they did through Bohemian Rhapsody, with this video attached.
Is this the real life? Mama! Mama! No, Mama! Mama? Mama? Dada? I see a little silhouette. He's just a poor boy. Easy come. Let me blow! Nothing really matters.
Huh. Scooter? Yeah, Chief? Remind me to stop setting up these video conferences.
And let's be clear, I don't think it's surprising if the Muppets give good representation to somebody. It is the Muppets after all. But for the record, I do think Bohemian Rhapsody is a pretty terrible biopic. If you'd also like to support the show, head on over to Patreon and like and subscribe, and let's get started.
What's wrong with you, face, baby! Yikes!
Yikes indeed. While this isn't the worst impression to date on the show, I will say I'm unimpressed by Lloyd's voice work on this battle. It's a passable caricature of a 1950s New York entertainer, but a pretty mediocre Sinatra, who did have a fairly distinct speaking voice and a very distinct singing voice. It's not quite bad enough to dock a point for character work, but it's pretty close.
With those teeth, would you throw them in no dust left to bite?
It's not the worst diss in the world, and I appreciate the Another One Bites the Dust reference. There's also a really interesting meta element here with Lloyd, who we've previously noted was bullied about his buck teeth growing up, delivering an insult about someone else having big teeth. But even with all that, it's still kind of just a middle-of-the-road physical appearance diss. Yeah, Mercury did have large teeth, which actually possibly shaped his mouth in a unique way that played a part in his vocal delivery. Fun, weird science and pub trivia knowledge for you, but this is too surface level to be more than neutral.
Christ, newsflash, kid! This is show business!
I kinda don't know what to do with all these old-timey interjections. It's not like they're disses or brags or anything, and they're kinda silly, but at the same time, I do find them pretty amusing. Lloyd's delivery is funny, and I think they overall add a positive aspect to the battle. I'm just gonna say a blanket point here to cover any and all of these that may occur.
Show some class when you dress. Shave that bush off your lips. Whoa.
Nah, okay, first of all, Freddie Mercury didn't even have a mustache for the majority of his career. Second, when he did have a mustache, he frickin' rocked it. Third, sure, he didn't usually dress in a traditional suit and tie, but criticizing the fashion of Freddie goddamn Mercury of all people is lunacy. We don't accept this kind of baseless slander here.
Whoa. Your band's name Queen, huh? Ain't that sweet?
I think the Ain't That Sweet line is trying to reference the Sinatra song Ain't That Sweet. It's really awkward and doesn't go anywhere, and I'm not even quite sure what he's trying to imply about the name Queen. I guess that it's effeminate and girly. It's not great, but I guess we'll keep it neutral.
You dance like you rode a bicycle race with no seat.
I don't think this one's as egregious as the fashion diss, so we'll keep it neutral again, but trying to diss the stage moves of Freddie goddamn Mercury, of all people. Sure, I appreciate the bicycle race reference, but also this dancing description applies way more to like Mick Jagger than Freddie Mercury. And yes, before you comment, I know he's trying to make some stretch gay insult here, but the next line's about to be way worse for that, so we'll save it for then.
That's what's wrong with you people. You'll do anything to get famous.
Hey, yo, what do you mean, you people, Frankie? Not even 100% sure why I'm insulted, but this is implying something worth a negative, I'm sure of it.
You changed your name to Mercury. You should have been Freddie Uranus.
Dog. My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
You think I haven't heard those things before? You're just a bully who's too scared to go to war.
Absolutely loving how they have Freddie Mercury beginning the performance in that signature, powerful, soaring vocal style that he was known for. As for the diss, I do appreciate the portrayal of Freddie brushing off Sinatra's insults and signifying that he can rise above them, and Sinatra, at least in this battle, is certainly being portrayed as a bully. And in real life, he was a very domineering figure, maybe not a bully necessarily, but I think it fits. However, I simply can't quite jump onto the draft dodging accusation at the core of this diss. It's of course referring to the fact that Sinatra never served in World War II. He did enroll for the draft, but had his service deferred due to medical reasons, most notably a perforated eardrum, which sounds very painful, and neurosis, which, whatever that means in 1940s medical terms. There's always been this speculation that he dodged the draft, but A, I truly can't blame anyone for not wanting to fight in a war, let alone the largest military conflict of modern times and maybe ever. And B, there's no actual evidence or even really suggestions of evidence to indicate Sinatra was actively trying to dodge the draft. And there is some reasonable evidence to say that he really did want to go to war. I'm saying neutral, the performance is still good, but the facts just don't quite align with it being a successful diss.
Got a hit song called My Way, but someone else wrote it.
God, I thought this line was the ultimate of ultimate insults back when I was a naive kid who knew nothing about copyright law or the inner machinations of showbiz. Now, let's clear things up. I will always respect an artist more if they have more mediums in which they're talented in, and I will always respect a musician who also writes their own material more than if that same exact musician didn't write their material. However, the fact is that art and entertainment is more complicated than just yelling "sell out" at every single performer who doesn't adhere to some strict definition of credibility. My Way, not the Limp Bizkit song, has a pretty interesting story behind its development, beginning actually as a French song with English lyrics called For Me, written by Jacques Revaux, before further developing with the very famous in France at the time singer Clo-Clo, aka Claude Francois, who turned it into the French #1 single Comme d'habitude. After its success, there was an effort to translate it into an English language hit with, of all people, a very young, pre-fame David Bowie taking a crack at it. His version never released, but he did rework it into the absolute banger Life on Mars. After Bowie, Paul Anka, who's an at this time of recording still living, performing, and songwriting legend, took his own stab at the song, ending up with the structure of My Way as we know it. However, he felt he wasn't the person who should perform the song and believed Sinatra to be the only one who could really bring his composition to life. Sinatra, then at a low point in his career and personal life, agreed to record My Way, and it basically was his comeback moment and crowning achievement that cemented his legacy. What this story shows is that there is no one way that great art needs to come into being. Mercury's line, though something that naive kid and teenage me saw as a great diss, is actually really reductive and misses some of the point behind great performance. And also, if Sinatra was good enough for Paul goddamn Anka, the case regarding his talent is pretty much open and shut. And also, Mercury literally didn't even write all of Queen's songs. All four members had multiple massive hits penned by them. Bassist John Deacon wrote Another One Bites the Dust, guitarist Brian May wrote We Will Rock You, and drummer Roger Taylor both wrote and sang on Radio Gaga. Mercury literally is guilty of what he's deriding Sinatra for. Honestly, it's close to a negative purely for the hypocrisy, but it's performed well, so we'll keep it neutral.
You're the least talented rat in your whole pack of bros.
It's good wordplay, basically referencing the Rat Pack, which was a loose evolving collective of famous A-listers from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s who sometimes collaborated with each other, with the most famous iteration being in the late 50s with Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and I guess Peter Lawford, who almost certainly was the actual least talented of this roster. Listen, I like the way the line's written, but as established with the previous one, calling Sinatra talentless is simply inaccurate. It stays neutral.
More notes in your whole range, you can't act and you can't dance.
I'm really conflicted here, but I think this stays neutral as well. Unlike with the other disses so far, I actually do generally agree that Sinatra was a pretty mediocre dancer and a limited actor. They simply weren't his strong suits. However, I feel like for this to fully land, we need some sort of specific examples. As it stands, the line is just a little too generic and vague. As for the 4 notes in his range line, this is an exaggeration, but Sinatra does have a famously limited vocal range, with him generally only utilizing about 2 octaves. By comparison, someone considered a competent vocalist usually uses about 3, and Mercury himself had about a 4-octave range, so about double Sinatra's. However, all this talk of the octave range really misses the point that the range isn't everything. Sinatra himself being as famous and acclaimed as he was and still is a testament to that fact, and the whole point of the way he performed was that he was a master within those 2 ranges that he operated. It's a bit like the My Way songwriting line for me, which at face value it seems like a great brag or diss, but if you actually dig into it, it's just kind of off base.
I'm more powerful than you when I'm wearing women's pants.
It's silly, and it may be leaning into some sort of weird sexism because, like, why are women's pants inherently less powerful? Is it the pockets? It's the pockets. But also, it's such a funny little line that helps Mercury shift gears from what were fairly ineffective disses against Sinatra's talent to bragging about his own prowess, which I think suits him more. I'll say a point.
Why do you stand there in a suit? It's like you're trying to bowl.
I don't know. It's about as ineffective as Sinatra telling Freddie to have more class. It's just 2 totally different styles that each person respectively pulled off, so these types of disses just really don't work.
When I rock the UK, South America gets horny.
That's really funny. It could be kind of a stretch reference to the song We Will Rock You, but I think it's more just generally about Queen being from the UK and referencing the Live Aid performance at Wembley Stadium, which is the era that Nice Peter's outfit and mannerisms are specifically pulling from, and saying his performance was so powerful and sexy that it sent shockwaves all the way to South America, which, yeah, it kinda did. Mercury was a powerful performer, and Queen had a big South American fandom. I think it's a fair brag, performed well.
Because my songs have balls. They're the anthems of victory. Your music is like the soundtrack to a vasectomy.
Listen, I like Sinatra, as established. I like big band music, and if we're being real, I feel like if I walked into the doctor's office for vasectomy, Imagine Dragons would be the most likely thing I'd hear. But this line, it hits, and the contrast between Queen's anthemic music versus the much more subdued style that represents most of Sinatra's work is effective. I'm saying a 3. It's a really great line, especially with the wordplay basically saying, my songs have balls, while yours are literally the anti-balls.
You're in the pocket of the mafia and everybody knows.
While it's fuzzy exactly how tied to the Mafia Sinatra was, it's pretty indisputable that he had interactions and dealings with them throughout pretty much his whole career, and the existence of the mob plays an important backdrop in all of Sinatra's most famous locales. Like, all I'm saying is it's probably not a coincidence that the 4 places I associate most with him are Jersey, New York, Chicago, and Las Vegas. That said, I again don't think Mercury does enough specific with the diss to actually justify a point.
Giddy
Dago.
Figaro.
Wow. That was wow. That just might be the actually most offensive moment of the show. Definitely so far up to this point, and we'll see, but possibly ever. I can't repeat those lines. And fun fact, at the time, I didn't actually know what these words meant. I was, I suppose, sheltered from anti-Italian racism.
Anti-Italian discrimination.
And I assumed it was connected with the previous line. It was the name of some mobster that Sinatra was allegedly associated with. But nope, that was just the N-word for Italians, followed directly by a second race insult done in the style of Bohemian Rhapsody. So essentially using the possible most famous song ever as a backdrop to saying something incredibly vile. History of the two slurs, can't believe I just said that sentence. The first started as an insult for West Africans before being used against Italian immigrants to suggest that they're non-white. And based on the time period when the word started coming into use with race theory and eugenics coming into play, implying that they were subhuman because of it. I cannot stress this enough. This is literally the N-word equivalent for Italians and should not be in a battle like this. Negative point. Then the second slur. This one is also pretty bad. It started getting used as a general term and then slur for sailors and then anybody from the Mediterranean countries, being a corruption of the last name Diego, which was used as a generic catch-all last name for people from that region. This one's weird to me because unlike the last one where I could see the twisted logic that went into it, this feels like it was just willed into being a slur, like it was made a slur just for the sake of having another slur. In any case, also really shouldn't be used in this context, and I'd say a tip if you ever wanted to perform a cover of this particular rap battle, don't. Unless maybe you're very confidently Italian and looking to reclaim some words. Negative point again. And lastly, let's talk about using Bohemian Rhapsody and Freddie Mercury to deliver these lines. It's a very bad choice, and frankly insulting to Mercury's memory and not in character for the purposes of creating a portrayal. This is a man who, in his lifetime, faced multiple types of prejudice and hid his AIDS diagnosis until his final days due to the stigma surrounding the disease, but who still lived his life with love and passion in spite of it all, and who in death is one of pop culture's most prominent figures for inclusivity. Sorry if this is somehow a controversial take, but Freddie Mercury should not be using slurs to insult somebody. And there's a third negative for you.
Easy, Jaws of Life. I can't stand the racing.
Jaws of Life is another big teeth insult. The Jaws of Life being this device that first responders use to open things like car doors to get people out of wrecks. I appreciate that Sinatra at least calls Mercury out for his racism, but I feel like then also insulting someone's appearance in the same breath kind of undercuts the indignancy. Whatever. Neutral. It's just kind of mediocre.
I love the colors and the quiz. Just ask Sammy Davis.
This line, more than any other, I think, reveals that this episode is written with a bit of an agenda, or at the very least with the writers having their fingers on the scale. What I'm saying is clearly Freddie was meant to win this battle, or maybe more so, the writers lacked the respect for Frank Sinatra as a character to write him in such a way that he could possibly win. Having Sinatra take a potshot like this by dropping two different slurs directed at Sammy Davis Jr., a man who is not just Sinatra's friend, colleague, and peer, but also like his brother over the course of 50 years, is some of the most tone-deaf writing I've seen in the series so far, only maybe surpassed by Mercury's obscene racism literally just prior. This is an obvious negative point, and I'd like to express my disappointment with all of this writing in general. Also, hello to Tazon Day of Chocolate Rain fame as Sammy Davis Jr. Holy hell. Hello, you absolute legend. What an insane high-profile YouTube cameo for such a blink and you miss it moment. Why did we not get an entire Tazon Day rap verse in his golden voice? Damn, now that's a missed opportunity. Anyway, yeah, very bad line, negative point.
Look, we all want to swing, baby, but you took it too far. You played butthole roulette, and you lost the draw.
I guess I'm giving it a point. It has that shock value comedy aspect, and it at least is offensive without being an overt slur, which I know is an incredibly low bar, but that's kind of just where we're at right now.
I took one for both teams from a disease no one knew existed.
This felt like a quite clunky way to dance around saying the word AIDS, but whatever. My main minor criticism is that Freddie certainly did not take one from both teams. That man absolutely gave it to both teams. If you don't think Mercury was a top or at the very least a power bottom, I don't know what to tell you. That's crazy and you should... Yeah, what were we talking about? Right. Neutral line, moving on.
I didn't leave a mark on history, I French kissed it.
I just like the wordplay, to be honest. Anytime Freddie's portrayed as showing the intensity and passion with which he lived his life, that's when the writing is at its best, so positive point here.
exhausted. I'm a champion of the world, extinguished in its prime. So kiss my ass, Frankie, but you'll have to wait in line.
Didn't say a whole lot with that, but the musical interjections, the We Are the Champions reference, the great delivery, and the fact that this all works well as a mic drop verse closer, I think it all comes together to deliver one last point for Freddie Mercury. Frank Sinatra versus Freddie Mercury hasn't aged well. Barring the lines themselves, Peter's Mercury performance is really good, and Lloyd's serviceable, I guess, as Frank Sinatra, but the writing is pretty bad and offensive with little payoff. On top of that, to me, it was clearly written in a way to have Mercury win, or more accurately, to have Sinatra lose, as they're really shallow with Frank's disses, brags, and references, and it feels like no one on the writing team respected him as a character. Additionally, its placement within the series is strange if you're watching in order. In a lot of ways, this feels like a worse retread of Elvis vs. Michael Jackson with that two famous musical icons angle. And it's not like the matchup doesn't make sense. I'd argue Mercury is the definitive rock frontman and Sinatra is the definitive jazz crooner, so thematically it does work, but it feels so lackluster only 3 episodes after a much better similar battle, and I feel like with a rewrite and some distance from the other musicians, I could see it faring much better if they'd waited maybe another season. But that's life. Sometimes a candidate runs in the wrong election year when even binders full of women can't help them connect with more than 47% of voters. But let me be clear. I have hope that a change is gonna come with the next battle. My fellow Americans, I'll see you then, and I'll catch you next time.